Oh, here we go with phase 4. And it is the most complex phase of all the phases. And the reason I say that is because when you start doing research on solar and electrical, your head is going to explode. So know that going into this. Please be patient with it. I was not. I will say right off the bat, right from the beginning, the best way to cover phase 4 is to hire someone. I'm just kidding. Well, not really. If you don't know that much about electrical, I do advise you to hire someone to do your electrical work for you. And the reason I say that, yes, you can pick out your components, you can pick out what you want for batteries, a charge controller, inverter, your panels and things like that. But when it comes to wire sizes, the different gauge of wires and how to plug it in properly, that is where you may want to hire somebody to do. I will go over with what I know and I'll go over the components. But really, you may want to consider hiring someone. If I did not have my dad there with me, there is no way I would have gotten it done myself, and I would have had to hire somebody. Thankfully, my dad was there. Thankfully, he did a lot of the research, because even he didn't know everything, but he knew 90% of everything. I think our biggest challenge was hooking up the ACR, or the battery isolator, or however you want to call it, that charges the batteries. I'll go into that. So the first thing that you have to do when it comes to doing your electrical is drawing out a electrical diagram. My dad asked me to do this several times, and I was procrastinating like crazy because honestly, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. What he wanted was pretty much what needed power: my refrigerator, my pump, my fan, my lights, what needed power, and what it was coming off of. It was coming off DC, and just how many were coming off of the DC panel. Because he needed to know those kind of things, and we needed to know what wires. That was pretty much the only part that I was procrastinating like crazy. So you have to draw out a wiring diagram. You can literally sketch it on a napkin. It's not that big a deal. Just make sure you have it so an electrician can look at it and say, okay, these things are, you have a wiring diagram. You can Google some wiring diagrams. I'll put them up right here. You'll see them. They look very complex, but honestly, when you start to do it, it's really not that bad. Look up the gauges of wires. For instance, the lights, I forget the proper names for them, where it's like a number 2, I believe, or whatever it may be. It's just the thickness of the wire. My lights were very thin wire. I think maybe it was a 12. No, Dad, you're gonna kill me, I'm sorry. But it's a thin wire. You can pick up that wire at Home Depot, and there's like a whole rack of wires. The person that cuts them, he'll actually say, oh, you want 6 feet of, this gauge. You just tell him 12 gauge, or they also come in aught, 12 gauge, 14 gauge. That's just the thickness of wire. And then they come in like a 2 aught, 3 aught, 4 aught. That's pretty damn thick, and when you get that thick, it's hard to bend. Again, electrical terminology, I don't know that much about. You really want to hire somebody. Dad, I'm sorry. When you're doing solar, I'll go over what I have, and then I'll go over the different things you could do. I have 3 200-watt panels, and they're flexible, so they're flat. I got them from overseas. When I got them, I'm pretty sure it was a little more accessible than they are right now. With the laws and the taxes that have changed, I don't believe that you can get them in the States now. I got them from China, and they probably manufactured them there, and then they shipped them over here, and I paid like $150 for shipping alone. So I got referred to where I got them from a friend of mine that was building vans, and I was very fortunate at the time to get what I got. I don't think they make these anymore. They are very difficult to find. I do know that other companies are now selling flexible panels. They're more like 100 watts. The reason I got flexible panels is because they're flat and you can't see them from the ground level when you're standing and looking up at my van, because my van is 9 feet in the air, and you can't tell that there's panels on the top, and I wanted to stay stealth. That is why I got the flexible ones. Now, if I was to do an adventure van, I would probably get panels, and I'd actually probably build a contraption where that they can tilt so they can actually face the sun. And I probably wouldn't get 3, I'd probably get 1 or 2, because when tilting at the sun, they charge your batteries a lot quicker because you have direct sunlight onto those panels. Flat ones, they don't gain as much absorbing of the sun. If you want to stay stealth, another way to do it is actually buying a suitcase. I'll show you what a suitcase is right now. And that's going to lead me actually into, if you are watching this and you really want to know about solar and how to work it, I actually put a video out of touring Renogy, which is all of my products. Again, Renogy is not paying me. I'm not sponsored by Renogy. I just really like them. So I took a tour of their showroom, and I did a half-hour tour with one of their sales and tech guys, all in one person. His name's Tony. Watch that video. I'll put a link up in the card. It is a fascinating, I did it a while back, so my interview skills were not really the best, but I promise you that you will learn a lot from the actual components themselves. What I have is I have three 200 watt panels, so 600 watts total. That goes into my solar charge controller, which is here in my closet. I have a 60 amp solar charge controller, and when you talk to a tech person, they'll actually tell you how many watts are you bringing in when you ask them what components you need. I told him I was getting 600 watts. He immediately said, we need to get you in a 60 amp solar charge controller, because I will not get the full amount of charge coming off of the 600 watts if I don't go with the 60 amp. So I went with a 60 amp solar charge controller. It's big, it's massive, it's beautiful. I love it. If I went only with 400 watts, I probably would have. I could have went with a 40 amp solar charge controller. Again, these companies that you talk to, that's why I like going to Renogy, because you can call them up, you can talk to a tech right there. You just ask them, hey, I have this many panels, with this many watts, what do I need for a charge controller? They'll tell you. And then you go to batteries. From the sun, charges the panels, goes into the charge controller. It's called a charge controller because it controls the charge. From the charge controller, it then goes into the battery bank, and there's pretty much 3 major batteries. There's the AGM, which are the lead acid. There's the gel batteries, and then you have the lithium ion or the lithium phosphate. I actually don't know the huge difference between the two of them. You're gonna have to read up a little bit more on them. A lithium battery is what's in your cell phones, your cameras, you know, a GoPro. It's a rechargeable battery. You know, the gel and the AGM are rechargeable as well, but it's those batteries that are light, are now making them bigger to fit into solar systems like this. They are, I still think, in my personal opinion, I still think they're like two or 3 years away from really refining that battery to make it perfect. The only reason I didn't go with that was because of that. I don't think they're there just yet in the battery and the lithium world of batteries. They're gonna get there soon, just not right now. This is my personal opinion. I also think that the price needs to come down a little bit. I can understand why they're expensive, but they're about triple the cost of what other batteries go for. My gels were like $300 each or $350 each, which is nothing for a 200 amp hour, or it's reasonable for 200 amp hours. I think, like, if I was to get 200 amp hours in lithium, I think 100 amp hours was 800. So to get 200 amp hours is 1600. Huge difference between lithium ion and like a gel or an AGM is weight, percentage that you can get it down to. My gels, I can only bring it down to 50% until I damage the batteries. If I had lithium, I can bring it all the way down to 10% before I damage those batteries. When you're picking your batteries, keep that in mind. The weight is a huge thing, actually. My batteries weigh about 130 pounds each. So I have 260 pounds in just batteries. When I was at Renogy, I actually asked them, what if I want to switch over to lithium? They have lithium phosphate. So what if I wanted to switch over to lithium phosphate batteries? They said I could absolutely do that, but guess what? I'd have to change out my solar charge controller, and I'd have to change out my inverter, because they all have to go, they all work with each other. So that kind of stinks. You'd have to change your entire system around. I already dropped 2,600 on my entire solar components. Again, you have to think about that. Also, another little fun fact, lithium ion, you cannot charge them from an ACR. ACR, what that does is that will take your van alternator, and it will take that power from the alternator and then bring it into the batteries while the van is running. So let's say you're driving for a half hour or 45 minutes or an hour or whatever it may be. You're driving somewhere and there's no sun. It's you know, it's no sun for days, whatever it may be. You're cloudy weather, overcast, and you're not getting a lot of charge into your batteries. Turn on your van, drive it around, and your alternator from your van will actually charge your house batteries. I actually know someone who doesn't have any panels. They only have an ACR, and they charge their batteries just by driving their van. It's possible. They also have it hooked up that they haven't yet, but they can get a suitcase and they can hook up their batteries that way with alligator clips. The inverters can go anywhere from 500 watt, 1000 watt, 1500 watt, 2000 watt, 3000 watt. I have a 2000 watt inverter. You want to talk to a technician about that, how much AC power you're going to be running. The inverter pretty much takes the DC power and then converts it into AC power. I'm going to say this right now that you want to run as many things DC as possible. For example, my heater, fan, my USB chargers, my water pump, my refrigerator, all of that is DC power, which is great. My light right now, I have a ring light on right now. That light plugged into the wall, and I have my inverter on. So when you have the solar panels on the roof, it's very easy actually. Your solar panels will literally just male, female plug right into each other, and you run those cables down into your solar charge controller. What's nice about Renogy is they actually sell it all in kits, and not just the panels and the inverter and those kind of kits. They give you like wiring components and actually tell you what gauges of wire to use. If you're going to plug in shore power, you have to get an inverter charger. Your inverter charger will you can plug in pretty much from your city electrical, and you can or a campsite, and you can plug right into the side of your van, and that'll actually run your entire van off of the city power. If you want that, if you're building an adventure van, I did it just in case I do go camping and things like that. I did buy an inverter charger, so it's kind of a cool little feature that you can just add onto it. So that's pretty much the rundown of the electrical. I hope you kind of learn a little bit of something and kind of where to get going with it. There was a lot to cover in regards to how to do things. Hopefully you learned a lot of things. If you have some questions, please comment below. And this is, like I said, this was not the best knowledge that I have on certain things. Hopefully you learned some from me showing you around my components in my van. Tomorrow we're gonna go over phase 5, the final phase, and that's pretty much finishes. And this is probably the most fun because it's the end of the van, and you get to make the big decisions on what your van is going to look like. You pretty much already should know, but it's kind of fun to play around with, and you can kind of, this is where shopping happens, and interior design, and you know, like I said, colors and stains. And I'll be honest with you, this guy right here behind me was a last minute decision. Kind of cool that it came together in the end. So I guess I'll see you tomorrow. See ya.